Okay. Good afternoon. I'm as Adam pointed out, I'm Craig with OSign. We had gone over a presentation, I think it was maybe a month or so ago, that was sort of the first part of this presentation, and it's reflective of a process we're going through with Support Kansas City right now, where we're looking at the brand and the messaging and how Support Kansas City talks about itself and the materials it uses for that. And so the other aspect of this is the marketing audit, where we look at the different assets and resources that are out there and try to get some ideas on how to improve the overall marketing resources. So that's the second part that we're going over today. So I'll kind of do the what's this brand audit piece of it. What the presentation itself that we're going to go through, as I was putting this together, I was trying to determine the most useful information that I could present to you. And so if you do a Google search on doing a brand audit or a marketing audit, you'll find a lot of different outlines and step-by-step processes of things you could do for that. And so I didn't want to do that same kind of thing that you'd find in a search. I wanted to point out some really useful insights and some things that I thought would be really the most useful for you, and kind of pulled those out. So this isn't by no means exhaustive. There may be other of course, techniques and things that you can use to gain insight. But our goal is, when you're doing an audit, is to really get insight into your brand and other brands and other marketing materials, to try to just get a lot of ideas to figure out, okay, where do we take it? Where do we go from here? And then one other thing I wanted to point out is, when you do any kind of brand audit, a lot of people, I think, that we talk to, look at it as a one-time thing, one and done. Okay, we did our audit, 5 years ago, 7 years ago, 10 years ago, and so we've got our marketing stuff set. But really, the best way to do this, especially if you're short on time, is to just piece stuff out, do a little bit at a time. You don't have to unveil an entirely new marketing strategy. If you're doing a rebrand, there may be some things you'll want to do if you're doing a new logo, or if you haven't had a logo before and you're getting your colors and your fonts and you're just totally redoing everything. That's one thing. But even after that, there's the initial audit, but then there's things you can do annually, but just as you go, if you decide that otherwise, a lot of this stuff can be so cumbersome that you end up not doing any of it. So just a recap from last week, we looked at the why, which is something you'll hear not only from us, but from a lot of people. It's a very common way to refer to your purpose, what your brand is about. And so we went over this in detail last time. If you want to listen to that, we have that presentation up. But your why is the purest form of who you are. And what we're usually trying to look at when we get your brand message is to identify the beliefs of the brand, and you are the brand. Like when we say brand, there's a lot of meaning behind it and a lot of jargon that can get confusing. We're going through this process now with a particular for-profit client, and we interviewed dozens of their employees, and we talked to them to figure out what their culture was like and who they were. And even at the time of when we get together as a group and we talk about this stuff, we struggle with, all right, this is what they said, but this is who the brand is and who they are. And we got to, and there's a big balance between your actual why and your aspirational why. And aspirational means that this is what you aspire to become as a brand. So let's work at getting that. And in order to get there, you have to live out your beliefs. And even if you're not currently living them out now, you have to make them true. Because you can take your beliefs and your ideas and the things that you believe about the world and about your organization and about the way you see see the world, and translate that into a message that will move people to take action, typically donors, but also people that you're trying to attract to your site. They'll take action when they believe what you believe. And so trying to get those is really the most important part of this process. And then one last note on this, your why is not your mission, vision, values. And the only reason I say that is because so many times every single organization that I've known from the beginning of time, they lay out their mission and their vision, and their values, and you read them and they're just so corporate and institutionalized that it's hard to really make sense of what you really are mean and what the emotion is behind that. So your beliefs, the difference between your why and your mission, vision, values is really emotional connection. So anyway, that said, um, where we fit in now, we looked at the why last time. Now we're looking into more the how. What are some of the things that we can do to um, tactically now to bring your brand out into the open? And so the audit is looking at what does your brand look like now. So the three most valuable brand tools that I would highlight to look at is that you are your most valuable brand resource. I mean, all the marketing materials, all the presentations, your employees, your staff have to buy in and believe this too. So when we go through this process, we typically, of the why that we talked about before, we don't usually just interview or talk to one person who's in charge to say, here's how I want it to be. We want to get a sense of what everybody really thinks. And then talk to the leadership and say, okay, here's where you're at, here's where you want to go, how do you get there? But your employees, the things that you say outside of your marketing materials are going to be the things that really stick with people the most. So, but the next most important brand tool is authenticity. Because people are going to see behind your words, and the words matter, and the things you say matter, and your design matters, and the way it looks matters. But in order to really have an impact, it needs to be authentic. And I kind of define that as transparency, or honesty, plus intention. Where do you want to be? Who you are and who you want to be don't have to line up just yet. But the difference there then is improvement. Are you is improvement plus intention making you more authentic? So marketing is not just about messaging, it's about guiding the conversation. It's about guiding how you operate your business. So it's so easy to look at a brand message as just messaging. This is what we tell people who we are, but if it's authentic and it's true, then you can take these exercises and your marketing message and then say, this is who we said we were and we're not living up to it. So what can we do to live up to it? And then the final thing that I want to highlight is consistency. People need to know it's you every time. So not only is that consistency in your message, it's consistency in your style. So one of the first things we'll typically recommend when we do any kind of once we get past the brand audit is to have a brand standards guide where you just have something laid out. It doesn't have to be very complicated. It can be a couple of pages, but it outlines, here's our logo, here's who we are, here's who we say we are, who we're trying to be. And this is something that's typically for internal use only. It's not something you send to your customers or your donors and say, here's our brand standards guide. It's an internal document that you use to hold yourself accountable to the things you said that you're about. So consistency in your style, in your presentations, the documents you hand out, your emails that you send out. The more you use the same font and the same colors and the same design over and over and over again, will start to give those meaning. Otherwise, your colors don't have any meaning. Your logo doesn't have any meaning unless you put meaning into it. And so that's one thing that we really want. I think we'll get across in some other ways as we go through it. So the elements that we'll look at when we're looking at the audit are looking at your assets, looking at your competition, looking at your analytics. We'll go back into the ongoing elements. And then I do what I'm calling audit hacks. These are just some really cool tools and resources that might hopefully be useful if you haven't tried these things before, to starting to develop some really good content that resonates. So the first element is the assets, gather digital assets and collateral assets. So during this part of the process, what you're trying to do is you're looking at as many things as you can. If you have collateral material, you've passed out brochures. If you have documents that you email to people, if you have a presentation like the one I'm going through now, and you've got a PowerPoint presentation or a bunch of them, just take a really close look at them all and see if they abide by those the brand messaging elements that we talked about in the last session, but also, is it consistent? Is it authentic? And so if they're not, those are some things that we start to take note, that we encourage you to take note of. So the more content that you gather that you've done in the past, the better you'll be able to assess what you can do moving forward. So what we look for in a website is usability, readability, and accessibility. Accessibility is something that's becoming more and more prominent, more and more important, where your sites have to go by some standards, and in some states and some countries, it's imperative because it's a part of the legal standard now too, where it's got to be accessible to people that are hearing impaired or sight impaired. So you've got to make sure your site holds up to those standards, and there are some tools that'll help you do that. One that I'll make note of, and I'll bring it up again at the end, is Accessibility. That's a tool that you can use that'll help guide you through whether or not your site is accessible to people that wouldn't ordinarily be. But the other element is usability and readability. To just go through your site like you're not you. Go through your site and look at it from an objective eye and say, if I wasn't me and I didn't know anything about this, does this look good? Does it feel like our brand? And so the next part is blog. I think I get a lot of questions from different, give me 1 second. Sorry about that. When it comes to whether or not to have a blog, it's a big question. I think a lot of brands struggle with whether or not they should do it. And I would say typically, if you have goals to appear higher in search engine results, and you have an objective to get out there more, a blog is something that can really help do that. But it's only a good tool if you use it as a tool, if you have something valuable to say. And we'll get into that, some strategies on what that means a little bit later in this presentation. But if you don't really have anything that's of value to people, then to the web as a whole, it doesn't really benefit you to blog. If you're just there to talk about, you know, just the people you hired, or some new thing that you did, or something that just occurs to you, but it doesn't really add value, then it may not be an area you want to look at. But if it is, it's a very amazing tool for some of these other things that we'll get into in a little bit. Social media, again, we'll get into this when we get into the audit hacks. But are you doing this the right way? There are so many different social media platforms out there that you find, especially the smaller the organization is, it gets really hard to keep up. And so when you're looking at it, one of the things you're looking at in an audit is, are you just repeating the same posts in every platform and just putting it out there as sort of or is there something more meaningful that you want to aspire to? And again, we'll get into that in a minute, get into some more detail. You're looking into to your email marketing, and looking at the emails that you send out, and really digging into whether or not those measure up to, if they look the same. You're looking for that consistency, and you're looking for the messaging that you came up with in the first piece of this. Does it align? Um, so the next piece of an audit then is the search side of it. Um, and the one thing that we look at when we're talking about search engine marketing is, um, can you find you? Um, when you so look for you, and assume that people don't know who you are, and look for you. If you can't find yourself, then other people aren't going to be able to find you either. And so there are some, again, some tools that we'll look at on how to find you better, and how to do the organic search and perform this part of the audit. We'll look at in a minute. But that's one thing to always ask yourself when you're doing any kind of search analytics is, the simplest thing you can do without using any other third-party tools, without using anything else. Just try to find yourself, or ask somebody else, hey, try to find me, like, and see what you find, and see what you come up with, and start recording those, and writing down the things that you find. Um, uh, and then the next part of that is paid search. The information you come up with when you're doing your research for the organic search is paid search. And this could be all of these can be a topic on their own, which we of course don't have time to get into. And if there's any of these I can dig into more in the future, I'd love to hear what people are most interested in learning about. But I think the big one that a lot of our clients and people in general always ask about on the nonprofit side is Google grants. And basically, if you are a 501(c), you should be able to apply for a Google grant and get, it's a $10,000 a month of free advertising from Google to add to your organic search results, and supplement it through paid search. So if people aren't finding you in the organic search, at least they're able to find you through paid search. And then finally, just again, looking at your collateral, looking at your brochures, your presentations, your documents. Those are all things that need to be updated and consistent when you're doing, not just the brand audit, but when you're going through the brand stuff. You just want to make sure that you're looking at everything. So the next piece of this then is the competitive research. When you're looking at competitors, I have competitive in quotes here, because I think, especially in the nonprofit world, I find, the competitive side, either this happens in the for-profit side too, where people don't really see themselves as having a competitor because they're different than, somebody else. And so what we're looking at are your direct primary competitors, which are people that have a similar model that you have. Then you're looking at secondary competitors, which might be organizations that attract similar donors, similar users, or even for-profit companies that do something similar. But then the other thing that we try to encourage you to do when you're trying to just get as much information and data as you can to get some insights and some ideas, the aspirational brands work really well. Just pick some brands that you admire, some that maybe have some similar attributes. When we ask this question, we ask this question and I try to always bring it up in every interview that I do, because it's one that leads to some really great insight, which is what brands and what other organizations that have nothing to do with your own remind you of you, even if it's just the tiniest piece. Because those are the ones that when you're really looking at it, it'll give you some really, really amazing ideas on ways to improve your overall brand in ways you never imagined before. So I prefer looking at the aspirational brands more than I do competitors, because most competitors are doing the same thing you are. They're pretty close to where you're at, and that shouldn't be your bar. Your bar should be, what do you aspire to become? So the first thing is, when you're looking at all your different competitors and what they're doing, you're looking at the same things that you looked at for your own site and for your own brand. But I found when you're looking at these type of competitors, it's a lot easier to be critical. It's a lot easier to critique them than it is you. And so by critiquing them, what do you like? What do you not like? Feel free to just critique it, take notes of the things that you do or don't like so that you can either avoid or do the things that you like or see. And so that's, I know that may seem obvious, but that's a really important thing to do, is to look at somebody else's websites and their social media and their email marketing comes through. There's one tactic even on the collateral side personally, and this is me being at ad agencies for decades. And one thing that you start to do when you're in that world for a long time is you notice something that comes in the mail or something that's in the paper or a billboard that really caught your attention. And again, this is where the aspirational brands come in, to pull those things aside and to create some kind of folder or some kind of area where you take note of the things that really capture your attention so that you can just look at it later for inspiration. And to try to get some ideas. So I've got entire folders of direct mail pieces that come to me, and I think either the messaging or the way they constructed it was really interesting, and just keeping those in a storehouse will again add to some really great ideas in the future. Next is that you just look at their blog, look at their social, look at their websites, and try to pull inspiration from those areas. Look at their search results, and there's a few third-party tools that I would recommend looking into that aren't that are relatively affordable. SEMrush maybe not, but SpyFu is one that'll allow you to look at other organizations and other companies that you want to search for to see what they're doing on the paid search side. In organic search, and try to improve your overall social. Those are some really good tools that we've found. Anyway, and again, with the critiques and the criticisms, make them your own. Don't be afraid to take somebody else's idea of something you saw before and say, I really like that. How do we do something similar? I think there are a lot of people who have an affinity to just copying what somebody else has done, but making it your own. That's the reason why you're doing this competitive research, is to get ideas. So don't be afraid to make it your own. And then the final thing that we typically look at then after your own assets and your competitive assets are the analytics. One more. Oops. On the analytics side, we want to look at what's working and what can be improved. And the things that we're looking for when we look at analytic data, first we use Google Web Tools. We use Google Analytics, and if you don't have Google Analytics set up on your site currently, it's an easy thing to set up and to do. You just set up a Google account and you can start at any time. But if you have a website at all, your server itself is getting a lot of that same analytic data. It's not organized the same way, but you can still pull that visitor data. You can pull any kind of information that you need, even if you don't have Google Analytics set up. But again, we'll talk about this on the ongoing piece of it. But if you decide you want to just totally refresh your brand and you're looking at your brand audit, and you hadn't done analytics in the past, it's okay. Just move on and get it set up as soon as you can. There's some really, really great insight that'll lead to some great ideas once you get there. On your website, you're not only analyzing the web statistics, you're also analyzing the usability. And we talked about this earlier on the asset side of it, but to go through your site, pretend like you're not you and you haven't seen this site before, and ask yourself, does this make sense to you? And I say do it yourself, not that you do your own sites, and it's not a DIY when I mention do it yourself. What I'm referring to under the do it yourself bullet here is you need to look at yourself as from a perspective that is not you. You've got to be your customer, and you've got to be your donor, and you've got to be your user, and look at it from that perspective. And if something isn't working, then that'll be the best guide to you is if you can pull away from, yeah, this looks great because because you don't want to work on it anymore. So one element that we talk about on the usability user experience, there's a tool that I would encourage you to look into, and we'll go over it again at the end of here. It's called Lucky Orange. Lucky Orange is a organization here in Kansas City. I use them a lot, but I don't have any affiliation with them. I don't know anybody at that organization, but they are a Kansas City company that really allows you to dig into the user experience, and we'll go into some of that in a little bit. But the next piece that you're looking at on the statistical side, when you're looking at social media, is the number one statistic of anything you can look at is engagement. It doesn't matter how many people saw your post. I wouldn't really worry too much about any other stat except for engagement. And engagement is, are you coming up with content that people are either commenting on or really finding useful and helpful? Are they sharing it or liking it? That's so much more important than any other statistic, that it's almost really the only one. Um, um, and and we're at the halfway mark here, so I kind of want to skip through some of this, but the same thing's true for email. And finally, the last piece of analytics that you can go through are just surveys, just asking people. You can use social media for this. You can use your website for this. But long form or short form, the more times you can get from users how they're feeling or how they're taking in your content, or if they're seeing it, that's almost better than any type of analysis you could do on your own, is talking to actual people. And again, Lucky Orange will be something I kind of take a look at to get into ways you can do that without directly asking your customer, your donor, or your users. The next piece of this is, again, the ongoing audit. Analytics and the rest of this process is not a one and done thing. Your best analysis doesn't come during the audit. When we were looking at all those analytic processes that you go through, you just look at it constantly, all the time. So we pull it up when we're doing, sorry, I went ahead of myself. We will look at that when we're going through the audit process, but really this is an ongoing effort. So find ways to integrate into it makes it so much easier when you're not doing this every 4 or 5 years, but on a regular basis. You've incorporated looking at statistics and into your regular day process, because it's so much easier to implement one thing at a time and to just do one thing at a time than it is to do an overhaul. The next piece of that as well is to look at some A/B split testing. This works great for email. It works great for some landing pages and social media content, which is create certain types of content and then change a little bit of it. There are some really, really great tools that I can email you later on how to do some really good A/B split tests. But essentially what you're doing there is you're looking at what's working versus what's not, instead of everything being a guess. Most of marketing for most people is a guess, and it's okay for it to be a guess. But if you've got time, you compare one guess to another guess, and then you see which one works better. And so there's an evolutionary process to really good marketing that is usually done through trying one thing out, seeing how that works, trying something else out with a little bit of a change, and comparing the two, and start to evolve your marketing that way. And then the last piece, again, on the ongoing side, is the analytics. Set up some easy goals. If you do implement Google Analytics, there's a tool for setting up goals. Just do some really easy things. If somebody clicks here, I want to know that they did these 2 steps or these 3 steps to get to this place. Like, it's you don't have to do anything highly sophisticated, but you can set up some easy goals. And the other piece of it is to try new tools. I'm going to share a few with you here in a minute. There's so many really great tools out there to make your marketing better that aren't very expensive. A lot of them are free. And it'll be something I continually strive to hopefully present Support Kansas City with, so that they can introduce more and more tools to you that will help make your marketing better. But don't be afraid to check a lot of those out and to try something and to get rid of what's not working. Um, Most of those tools that are out there, for not only analyzing but for uh, helping your marketing grow, um, you're not going to. They're individual. In other words, um, you might find something very valuable that somebody else doesn't, and it's just a personal preference. So you almost got to uh, take whatever anybody says with a grain of salt and just try a lot of different things. So um, the last thing I wanted to go over with you then are just some specific examples. So I kind of call these audit hacks, helpful tips to do a better audit and have a better marketing strategy. So the things that we'll explore really briefly are the search engine elements of this. I'll go over the anatomy of a search result, in case this is something you may or may not be familiar with, but there's a lot of information in every search result that can give you a lot of insight in ways you can improve. There's a lot of affordable tools that'll make it easy as well. Then I want to look at just some blog strategies. So we talked about whether or not you should do a blog. And again, it is typically recommended, if you do have if you feel like you've got something valuable to contribute to people's lives through it, then it's very highly recommended element of marketing, because it is something that's updated. It's something that gets put out there. It's not just once. It's something that you're doing over and over again, similar to social. And then on the social side, know your platforms, know your posts. I'll get into what that means in a second. And then finally, I'll look at the analytic tool recommendation of Lucky Orange. So the first thing, again, I mentioned this before, but search yourself. So search engine analysis, using analytics and third-party tools are great, but there's better insight than just searching things to gain insight. So search yourself, search for others. That when we looked at the competitive research, do a search for them and see what comes up when you search them versus yourself, and notate the difference between the two. Pretend you are your audience and pretend you are a prospective user. If you're trying to get donations, or you're trying to get more people to service, or and that's your target on your site, knowing who that audience is and pretending you are them is really going to be some of the greatest insight you can get, short of being able to sit down and interview or survey your audience. So I want to just look at the anatomy of a search result. This is one we did when we did nonprofit accounting services. So I don't know if you can see my mouse here, but I'll kind of pretend like you can. But right here are where you have the paid ads, which a lot of this are things a lot of you would probably do know, but I'll show you why it's useful. But then you look at the organic search, and if you notice here, Support Kansas City is the second result in the organic search. The first one is Nonprofit Connect, but the nice thing about that is Support Kansas City is mentioned in that first result as well. So but the insight that we get here in this particular result is, again, we weren't searching for Support Kansas City. I just did a search for nonprofit accounting services. And this says Support Kansas City front page, which would indicate to me users don't care if this is the front page or not. So we might want to change something so that we can change what pops up here. We can change here, and we can change these links, our services, who we are. But those are changes that happen slowly and over time. So once you identify your organic search result in a certain area, there are steps you can take to change this. You just have to identify, okay, I want it changed. So then the next piece of this is the anatomy of a search result. Again, this is all for nonprofit accounting services. Under the business section, Support Kansas City is not listed here. So it's not seen as one of the businesses, even though it's top here in this search result. So we want to be here as well. But the other piece of this I wanted to point out are what are called snippets. So this is where the blog piece of this comes in handy. If you are going to have some kind of blog or some area where you're going to generate content on a regular basis, this is the type of thing where this comes in handy. Google has these, and I'm sure you've seen it by now. It's whenever you do a search result, you'll get this people also ask, and when you click on this result, you don't have to go to their web page. It just tells you the answer to your question. And so there are some, and those are called snippets. So what I would encourage is I can answer more about that if that's an area you wanted to show up more in search results. Then you could look at some of these questions or think of other questions that people might have that are looking for nonprofit accounting services, and answer those questions, and you can start to show up in these snippet areas. Your content can start to show up in a snippet. And then finally, I just wanted to show you this keyword tools here. This is something that you typically won't see, but you can download on Google Chrome or other elements. If this is something you're doing regularly, you can download certain tools to start to analyze keywords. And again, I will provide you some of the resources of what I use to analyze keywords that wouldn't show up in a typical search result, but you can download apps on Google Chrome and Firefox and some other areas that'll give you some of those insights. The other search tools that we would typically recommend, the one that you were just looking at is called SEO Minion. It's a Chrome extension that I was just showing you. I think I mentioned SpyFu. That's a tool that helps you look at search tools and tactics that your competitors are using. And again, I use that term competitors very loosely. And Ubersuggest is one that I've used pretty consistently. And if we got more into not having this be a general overview, but we're just talking about search engine elements, then I could go a little bit more into what some of those tools are. Ubersuggest, SEO Minion, SpyFu are just some that I would recommend you taking a little bit of time to look into. So one thing that'll really help your organic search is going to be paid search. And for a nonprofit, you're in no better place to do paid search than to be a nonprofit, because you can get $10,000 a month from Google through ad grants. If you're not already signed up through ad grants, I would recommend doing that part right away. They make it really easy to go through this process. And I say it's easy. If you've done it before and you've had a Google Grants account, it can get really, really hairy and hard to do, because if you don't have access to an old account that uses the same nonprofit, it gets a little bit tricky. We've had some really great experiences with Google Grants. We've had some really difficult ones. So if it is something you want to get more involved in and start to look at how you can get access to this, I'd love to be able to answer those questions either at the end or at some other point to really dig a little bit deeper into Google Grants. The next thing I just wanted to share with you, we talked about blogs. The reason why I continue to bring them up is, for some people, they just aren't useful. For those that they are, where you have something really valuable you want to share, here are some tools that I would do if you're not doing it currently to start getting things that are highly searchable. So instead of asking yourself, is a blog right for you, the better question is, do you have anything worthwhile to give away? Content that you can give to people and not expect anything in return right away. If you do, then this could be a really great resource for you. You tie it to your search strategy. So when you do some keyword research and you start finding out keywords that you want to show up in that you're currently not showing up in, one strategy that we do is we call it the pillar post strategy, which is some of the best type of content for a blog might be 5 steps, 5 accounting tricks that can turn your, and I'm going to use Support Kansas City as an example here, just to save time. Yeah, so it might be something like, 7 tricks to that beginning nonprofits can do to make sure your books are, up to date. And from those 7 posts, you want to list all 7, and you would have the title of it needs to be somewhat engaging in that manner, where it's but then every each 7 element becomes a very valuable piece of content. So as a user, I could read through the list of 7, and then I can look in more detail on each individual bullet. But the key to writing a good blog is to really make that information consumable. So the smaller you can make it, you could have a really, really long post. And if you do, you want to divide it up in a way that's a lot more consumable. And so the pillar posts help you do that by having these 7 things, and the things that really make you an expert at something, divide them up into a number, do a quick post on those, and then take each of those 7 elements and write a different blog post that digs a little more deeply into each bullet. And then you can link each of those 7 posts to the big pillar post, and you can link the big pillar post to each the 7 of those individual posts. Anyway, that's one strategy we'll typically use when we're just getting started for the first time really doing a blog. The other one we call the ask us anything strategy. You put something on your site that says, hey, ask us any questions. We want to be able to we want to be able to help you answer whatever questions you have. And then when we get a question, we just don't answer it. We answer that user as soon as we can, but we try to turn those into a blog post, because if somebody is asking you a question, there's a really good chance that they are asking that question to Google too. And so if you're writing content, you can take that question and you can turn it into a headline, into a blog post, and write about that. And then the next person that asked that question may not be asking you. They may be asking Google, but they will find you. And then kind of tied to that is the social survey strategy. So if you're looking for a good way to use social media and tie it into a good blog strategy, ask a question on social. Instead of just posting something, ask them something, get their feedback, use that feedback as engagement, but then take the feedback that people give you and turn it into a blog post. And then once that blog post is ready, turn that back onto social media and promote the blog post that you just wrote that you asked them for. So it's the cyclical nature of using social media and blogs together in a way that helps you produce good content. So if you're really struggling for some good content, these are just a few. We have a lot of other really great strategies for coming up with good content, but those are some good ways to get started. Finally, a few other points before we wrap up then on the social strategy. The first point is to know your platform. And so this is a good guide that we use typically for social media marketing platforms. If you're looking at Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, TikTok, and Snapchat, those are the ones we have listed here. Of course, there are a lot more, but to start looking into your audience, does your audience measure up to which ones? A very, very common thing that people do is they will create content for one particular social media platform, and then they just hit repeat and put it out on every social media platform out there. Knowing the ages and the type of content that people are looking for will help you line up with what kind of content you have, what kind of information you have, and saying, okay, this is the perfect social platform for us to get started on. I'm sure a lot of people that I'm talking to or that are listening to this will already be involved in social media in some way or another, and this may not be that important because you're already in it. But if you're just in all of them and you don't have a lot of time to be involved in them, they could be dragging you down more than helping you out. So these are some good guides to follow, and you'll have this presentation. You can kind of look at that a little bit later. The other piece is to know your posts, the type of post you're writing. This is a really good guideline that we found really does work, is that 70% of your posts should be informational, education, advice, how-to type of elements, 20% emotional. So a good meme or a good um, just emotional connection you can make. And then 10% of your posts can then be, if you're doing those two things, can be promotional. And by that, it's asking donors for money, asking for people to sign up for something, trying to get people to come to your event. Like the promotional stuff should be about 10% of your posts. And so that's a really good rule of thumb to look at for the content. Then finally, I just wanted to review this tool with you. And when I signed up, I think it's like $10 a month. It might be up to 12 or 13 bucks a month now, but it's um, on your site. What basically the reason why a lot of our clients will end up using this tool is the live chat. So if you've ever been to a site where somebody needs some information, you can have a live chat feature that will allow them to start talking to you. And when you're not available, it'll give them some other messages that you can start to program in. But the bigger thing is this is a really great analytic tool where you can start to look at heat maps, and you can look at, there's these session recordings that it mentions here, and surveys where you can start to really get some great insight into your audience. So the session recordings are actual recordings of somebody who went to your site and where they clicked, and then from there where their mouse was and where their eyes were and what they were looking at on your site. So if you're really digging into what elements of your site need improvement, Lucky Orange is a really great tool. So not only does it provide you some engagement interactive tools like the live chat, it gives you some really great ways to be able to convert somebody that comes to visit your site into a donor, into somebody using your services, and into a user that comes back a lot. So it's one of the most inexpensive tools we typically recommend, which is why we do a lot of recommending of it. And I think it's a really great one to get started on if you're looking at doing any kind of audit. And again, if you don't have this installed, it's not going to help you in the early stages, the initial stages of an audit. But what it'll do is it'll give you information ongoing over time to really help you. The learnings that you get from this, you will be, I think, very happy with. So that's all I've got on this. I think there's a lot more information that we could go through, that we could have gone through, but these are just some of the key things I wanted to point out that hopefully help in not only your audit, but what to do with some of the information that you ended up discovering in that audit. So I hope that's helpful.